Watershed. First time I met Khalid Mansour, I was neck deep in contaminated water at the source of Portland's primary spring runoff system, taking samples of what used to be clean drinking water, and he was reading me legal statutes while standing in a three-piece suit in a muddy riverbed. My name is Daniel Kim. I'm an urban park ranger for the city of Portland, third-generation Korean American from the Pearl District, and I spend my days managing 8,000 acres of city parks while pretending the climate crisis isn't actively collapsing everything we're trying to protect. Thursday morning started normal patrol, wildlife assessment, routine water quality checks at our monitoring stations. Then the emergency alert came through. Chemical discharge detected at Riverside Industrial Complex. The text read, "All park rangers to headquarters. Priority response." Riverside had been there since the 1970s, a pharmaceutical manufacturing facility that the city had been trying to get closed or relocated for 5 years. They'd failed every environmental compliance audit. The city council had threatened fines. The EPA had issued citations. And yet here we were, with a Category 3 chemical spill into the spring system that feeds into Powell Butte water reserves directly linked to drinking water for 40% of the city. I made it to the headquarters in 12 minutes. My supervisor, Marcus, was already coordinating response with the EPA and county hazmat teams. But the problem was operational. The spill site was in the park system. The contamination was spreading through protected green spaces, and we needed immediate containment of the natural runoff before it reached the municipal water intake. "We need someone on the ground at the source," Marcus said. "The runoff point is at Bear Creek. You know that system better than anyone. I need you to assess the contamination spread and coordinate with the state team. Containment specialists are en route, but they'll need accurate mapping of water flow and dispersion patterns." "How long do we have?" I asked. 3 hours before the spring runoff reaches the intake. Maybe 4, if the rain holds. It wasn't going to hold. The clouds were already building. Pacific Northwest in November meant rain was coming, which meant the underground spring was going to push harder, faster, carrying whatever chemicals Riverside had dumped into it, directly into the water that people were going to drink. I grabbed my gear, headed to my truck, and drove toward Bear Creek with my emergency lights on. That's where the universe decided to complicate things. I was setting up my water quality monitoring equipment at the convergence point where 3 underground springs met before flowing toward the main intake when a car pulled up behind my truck. Not a county car, not a hazmat vehicle, a Tesla, a very clean, very expensive Tesla, in a parking area that was supposed to be restricted to emergency vehicles. A man got out. He was wearing a 3-piece suit, literally a 3-piece suit: navy jacket, patterned vest, crisp white shirt in muddy, contaminated forest while water was literally pouring into the earth around us. He was also carrying a leather briefcase, which seemed ambitious. "Daniel Kim?" He had an accent, a good face, and an air of absolute certainty that he belonged here. "I don't know you," I said, not looking up from my equipment. "This is a restricted area during environmental emergency response." "I know. I'm Khalid Mansour, environmental lawyer with the Coalition for Clean Water Advocacy Group. The city attorney just called me. They're asking for immediate legal coverage because Riverside's going to argue that the spill was an accident, unforeseeable, that they shouldn't face liability." He said this while literally wading into muddy water in a 3-piece suit. "I need real-time data on the contamination pattern, the scope of the spill, and the rate of dispersal." "You have it." "I need it. We have approximately 3 hours before this becomes a political problem instead of an environmental." I looked up. He was hiking through mud in Italian leather shoes, definitely Italian leather. They were too nice to be anything else, with complete disregard for his own appearance or his clothing's value. He looked like he was ready to argue law while the world fell apart. "This isn't my responsibility," I said. "I'm collecting data for containment protocols. Legal strategy isn't. Legal strategy is the only thing that will keep Riverside from operating this facility again," he interrupted, not unkindly. "Environmental regulation is toothless without litigation. You can stop the spill. I stopped them from doing it again. We both want the same result. Help me." There was something in his voice that made me believe he actually understood the stakes, not as an abstract legal problem, but as something visceral, a threat to the city he lived in, the water people drank, the systems that made urban life possible. "Okay," I said, "but you're going to destroy that suit. It's insured," he replied, already moving toward the water. "What do I need to do?" We worked for the next 2 hours in perfect, unplanned synchronization. I measured contamination levels, traced the water flow patterns, identified the dispersion radius, and calibrated the severity. He documented everything in legal format, cross-referenced it with previous Riverside violations, built a timeline of negligence, and photographed evidence. He waded through mud and contaminated water, taking detailed notes while his three-piece suit slowly transformed from expensive attorney to someone who'd been in an environmental crisis. "What chemicals are in this?" he asked, reading over my shoulder. "Phenol, acetone, and trace amounts of something I can't identify yet. We'll have full analysis in 8 hours. "Okay." He was already typing on his phone. "I'm sending this to EPA contacts. If we can prove Riverside knew about deteriorating containment systems, which I'm guessing we can, find in their maintenance records, we can file for emergency injunction against operation within 48 hours. That gives us time to document everything." "You really think you can shut them down that fast?" "I think you're going to give me the data. I'm going to make the legal case. And the city is going to panic and pull the permit." He looked at me, covered in mud, still somehow maintaining complete professional composure. "The question is whether we do it correctly the first time, or whether we do it 3 times over the next decade." The rain started around hour 3. Not the soft Pacific Northwest drizzle, actual rain, the kind that meant the spring system was going to push harder, faster. We packed up the equipment, I transmitted my data to County Hazmat, and Khalid continued working on his laptop while the rain soaked both of us. "We should move," I said. "This containment area is going to get flooded." "1 second. He was typing rapidly. "I'm filing the emergency injunction request. I need a statement from you. You're the official monitoring party, and I need your professional assessment that this constitutes an immediate and ongoing threat to public health." I gave him a statement. He typed it up, attached my data, and hit send. His phone buzzed 30 seconds later. "City attorney got it," he said, looking up. "They're notifying Riverside that the facility is operating under an environmental emergency protocol. If the EPA confirms the contamination, Riverside gets a 48-hour shutdown notice." We stood in the rain at the contamination site, and I realized that I was looking at someone who just done in 2 hours what the city had failed to do in 5 years, applied enough pressure, in the right format, with actual evidence, to force action. "You ruined a suit for this," I said. "You waded through contaminated water for this." He extended his hand, muddy palm and all. "I'm Khalid. I think we should talk somewhere that isn't an environmental disaster site." "Daniel," I took it, shook it. His grip was firm, his hand was cold from the water, and I had no idea what came next. "Coffee?" he asked, after we both decontaminate. "Yeah," I said. "Coffee sounds good." We did decontaminate. My house, then, is a beautiful place in the Hollywood district with floor-to-ceiling windows and art that looked like it probably had conversations about representation and meaning. He changed into jeans and a sweater, and suddenly, the three-piece suit lawyer became approachable in a completely different way. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a conversation about his family, Lebanese American. His father was an engineer. His mother was a translator. They were proud of his legal work, but worried about his passion for unwinnable cases, which he argued weren't unwinnable, just underfunded. My family, by contrast, Korean American, parents had met in graduate school. My dad was a structural engineer, mom worked in urban planning. Both had impressed upon me from childhood that we had an obligation to the places we lived, protection, maintenance, care. "Your family would like me," Khalid said, sitting on my couch. "They don't know you yet, but they would." I showed up in a three-piece suit to an environmental crisis, waded through contaminated water, and immediately started strategic litigation. He smiled. That's basically peak Korean American parent approval material, right? I laughed. And then, a way that sometimes happens when you've been working toward the same goal with someone. When you've moved in synchronization and mutual understanding. Khalid reached over and kissed me. It tasted like the disaster we'd averted. Like rain and mud and legal strategy. Like two people who just realized they were the same kind of person, the kind who shows up when things fall apart. The 48-hour shutdown became permanent. The EPA, backed by the legal filings Khalid had prepared, found systematic negligence in Riverside's maintenance protocols. The city used the emergency injunction to revoke the operating permit. By the end of the week, the facility was closed pending complete environmental remediation. Khalid and I became a thing somewhere in that process. It wasn't planned. It was just that he kept showing up at water quality checks with coffee. And I kept asking him questions about legal strategy. And somewhere we discovered that talking about infrastructure and environmental policy was actually romantic when you were talking to the right person. He introduced me to his family at Thanksgiving. His father asked me technical questions about water system management. His mother made too much food and kept insisting I was too thin. His siblings immediately started planning how our relationship would solve for environmental justice. It was overwhelming and wonderful. I brought him to my family's holiday party. My mom positioned him next to my dad for exactly 40 minutes before my dad turned to my mom and said, "He's fine," which in Korean American parent speak means, "Excellent." My little sister added him on Instagram. My grandmother told me I'd finally chosen someone with sufficient backbone. 3 months in, Khalid took me back to Bear Creek, not the contamination site, but downstream where the water ran clean, where the system had been protected from the spill by containment protocols and rapid response. "I want to show you something," he said. We walked along the creek, and he took me to a natural pool formed by the creek bed, where the water was clear enough to see the rocks beneath. In the middle of autumn, moss-covered and peaceful, water that had almost been destroyed, now running pure. "This is what we saved," he said. "This specific water. This system, it's beautiful," I said. "It's worth fighting for." He took my hand. "Everything worth fighting for is beautiful. You're beautiful when you're checking water quality. The work is beautiful. The outcome is beautiful." "Are you saying you're in love with me because I care about infrastructure?" I asked. "I'm saying I'm in love with you because you waded into contaminated water without hesitation. Because you understand that protecting systems is love. Because you show up when things fall apart." He pulled me closer. "Is that weird?" "No," I said. "It's perfect." He kissed me there at the clean water, with the Pacific Northwest autumn wrapped around us. And I realized that sometimes you meet people at exactly the moment when the world needs saving, and you discover that saving the world with them is just another way of falling in love. 1 year later, Earth Coalition for Clean Water won a major lawsuit against Riverside Industrial Complex. The company was required to pay full remediation costs. The city implemented new environmental monitoring protocols. Our water system was safer. Khalid and I moved into a place together in the Hollywood district, his place, because it had the right light for the art he collected. But I got to redesign the entire second floor office as an environmental monitoring hub where I could work from home on my research projects. My family loved him. His family loved me. We'd learned each other's languages. I could speak enough Arabic to understand when his father was making jokes. He could speak enough Korean to appreciate my mom's cooking. Comments. On a quiet Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year after the spill, I got home to find the apartment decorated with photographs. All of them were pictures of clean water, protected water, systems we'd saved, places we'd worked together. And in the middle of the living room, Khalid was waiting with a ring. "I know this is practical," he said. "We've already built a life together. We've met each other's families. We've saved a water system together. But I want to make it official. I want to wake up every day and have this be the plan: you protecting systems. Me making sure the law protects you while you protect them." I said yes. We got married in a ceremony that my mom and his mom somehow coordinated perfectly, in a garden by a clean creek. with both our families present and absolutely scandalized that we'd managed this kind of logistics without them planning it. The reception happened at a restaurant in the Pearl District, the neighborhood where I grew up. Khalid gave a speech about infrastructure and love being the same thing, systems that hold things together, that prevent collapse, that require maintenance and care. My dad applauded. His father nodded approvingly. As we left the reception, walking through Portland's evening rain, Khalid took my hand. "The spill," he said. "If that hadn't happened, I would never have met you." "I would have met you eventually," I replied. "We're both from Portland. We both care about the same things. But we met in the middle of crisis," he said. "That means something. It means we started with purpose. We started saving something together. Everything else," he gestured at the wedding, "the city, our lives, this is just the continuation." I squeezed his hand. "So you're saying my job is to keep contaminated water out of rivers, and your job is to keep lawyers from corrupting good causes. And together, we're keeping the city intact." "Exactly. That's the best marriage metaphor I've ever heard." He laughed. "And we walked through Portland rain into the life we built, one system at a time, one saved watershed at a time, one moment of showing up together at a time." Security footage from the Powell Butte water treatment facility. Two men in professional gear standing at the water monitoring station. Daniel checking readings, Khalid reading legal documentation, both wearing wedding rings. In the background, clean water flowing through the system. In the foreground, two people who learned that love looks like working toward the same goal together.